What does it take to create a vibrant, thriving life? First, the sad news is that Thoreau was right. Most people live quiet lives of desperation, lacking in meaning, fulfillment, and vitality. But we choose more. We choose to create extraordinary lives. And the Art of Vibrant Living show entertains you with inspiration, empowerment, and education to create your life into a masterpiece. It's time. Let's vibe up. Aloha, y'all. Daniel Aaron here. I am your host. This is the Art of Vibrant Living show. And let's go, because you deserve to have a vibrant, thriving life. And yes, we're here to entertain you, inspire you, more importantly, though, to empower you. So my invitation, take something today. It may be something that our amazing guest, Chris, shares with you. He's going to bring a lot of gold, but it may be just something that clicks for you and you go, and you know, that's your next step. Do something with this. That's my invitation to you. All right. Today, Chris Braitch is a father of three whose mission is to move himself and the world around him towards connection and compassion. He works as an emotional health coach, leadership coach with Compassionate Leaders Global, and as the founding director of the Seen and Heard nonprofit offering well-being support to past and present pupils of the private school system, many of whom have experienced institutional abuse and neglect. I'm so excited to learn from and discover more about that world from you, Chris. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you very much, Daniel. Yeah, it's a real honor to be here this evening. Thanks.
You're welcome. And let's dive right in, because what you're bringing to the world, emotional intelligence in a very specific arena, not just, but in the arena of boarding schools and institutional abuse and neglect. Why that area? What is it about that area that lights you up?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. You got to kind of do what you know, I think. So that was my background. So I went to a UK boarding school at 7 years old, and I was a boarding pupil from 7 to 13, and then I was a day pupil in a boarding school 13 to 16. So good level of personal experience of that system. And I think in the UK, we created the boarding school system, been there for two or 300 years, but very prominent in the last 150 years, 200 years, and it was a machine of the colonial kind of setup, and we exported it all over the world. So the countries that where the UK, where Britain had colonial influence, so whether it's Australia, New Zealand, or India, Africa, parts of Africa, the States, and parts of Europe. So it's a model that was used extensively for creating leaders, if you like, for creating soldiers of empire to go out there and kind of do the empire's bidding. And then over the last sort of 10, 15 years, it's started to change, soften up a little bit more. But for many people in living memory, some of which are in their 80s, 90s now, it was a really difficult place to grow up. As a young person, there was a lot of abuse, a lot of neglect, and the schools were pretty tough. So that's how is my personal experience, and how that led to my emotional and physical poor health as an adult that got me interested, in doing something in this space. So, yeah, thank you for asking.
Yeah, okay. Well, that makes sense. And I hadn't thought about it before meeting you, that yeah, of course, the whole boarding school thing really comes from one place and has spread out, and pros and cons, no doubt. And in your work, you talk about vulnerability as being a key part of transformation. Um, so I'm curious for you, what's a moment of post traumatic healing or discovery that changed things for you?
Yeah, thanks. I think vulnerability was, I call it now a superpower, but that was up until I had a breakdown 5 years ago. Before that, before that point, vulnerability was a dirty word.
Mm,
The British stiff upper lip, our keep calm and carry on sort of national motto, um, meant that vulnerability, yeah, was absolutely not welcome. And those
mm,
emotions, that aren't welcome in childhood get put into shadow, and what's in the shadow bag devolves into barbarism, pops up as all sorts of weird and wonderful addictions and behavioural problems and health stuff. So, for me, the vulnerability bit was when I had this breakdown, 5 years ago. I was completely physically and emotionally incapacitated, and I had to ask for help. I think it was that or die, and that was a very, very real possibility at the time. So, um, in my darkest night of the soul, found the right coach, found the right, uh, you know, modalities, things like emotional freedom technique and matrix reimprinting, and all the wonderful areas of somatic experiencing, all these things I'd never even heard of.
mm.
And also the men's groups and men's work movement, because when I started to share and talk about what had happened to me and how I felt, uh, you know, my vision, connection, and compassion, I started to connect with people for the first time in a long time, and I started to feel compassionate towards myself at the start, and then obviously from that self compassion comes compassion for the world around you. But yeah, that was the light bulb moment for me. Was 5 years ago, it was really only my children that kept me alive at that point, and that making sure I was showing up for them. Um, but yeah, my mission, my life vision at that point was don't die until the kids are 18. That was it. That was all I had. And then after that, I thought they're on their own. Then they'll be off into the world, and if all goes wrong again, like it had many times in my life, then I'd find an island and drink myself to death. That was the game plan, but not anymore.
Well, thank goodness for that. And all right, let's rewind a little bit. One of my favorite quotations when I read A Course in Miracles many years ago, a line jumped out at me. It is in our vulnerability that our true power lies. And like the way that word vulnerability was a dirty word for you prior to 5 years ago, I grew up with vulnerability meaning weakness, right? Susceptibility, and certainly to be avoided at all costs. And so you described it as a superpower. The Course in Miracles describes it as our true power. How does that work? What's going on?
Yeah, thank you. I think ultimately, for me, to be physically, emotionally, spiritually healthy, you have to show up fully. There can't be anything left in the dark corners, of the soul and all this sort of stuff, and you can't be showing up out of integrity.
Hmm.
And ultimately, vulnerability really, for me, is the doing away of holding something back, of finding parts of yourself that aren't welcome either to yourself or the world around you. So, you
Hmm.
know, the,
Hmm.
if you're packing parts of yourself away, the transverse of that is everything's there and available, um, and so you connect it to yourself, you can connect to people around you. But I hear you that with the um, vulnerability in many, many families, in many institutions, it's not safe to be vulnerable, physically, emotionally, spiritually unsafe, and so. that's very much the boarding school, the institutional stuff. And when I use boarding school, I'm not talking just about the elite, $60,000 a year boarding schools. I'm talking about, what we call here the sort of naughty boys' homes, the behavioural schools, the special needs schools. We have state boarding schools here, and we know, of course, in the US, you've got a very big private schooling sector. In Canada, there's that awful legacy of the indigenous population being put through the British boarding schools that were built there and killed and traumatized. So it has this legacy of creating environments where any weakness is absolutely unsafe, and so therefore the young person puts a hell of a lot of themselves away in shadow. And of course, that's not just institutions or growing up in care, state care. That's in families where it's not okay to be angry, it's not okay to be sad, it's not okay to be scared. You've got to just put a brave face on it all. So yeah, whenever it happens, it's a wound to the original self, to the soul that comes into this world with a 360-degree personality. And I like to think of it as, we come into the world fully formed, and then the world just takes chunks off us, until it sort of looks okay to the world, maybe, but it's a hell of a long way away from where we started. So, yeah.
Well, okay, that all makes sense to me, and if you're up for it, I want to go further because I know that this is a not only an important area in the world, it's an important part of your journey and your work. This idea of vulnerability, and you mentioned how in certain situations like boarding schools and families, to be vulnerable is dangerous, right? And then you had an experience 5 years ago where what was a dirty word became a glorious word, right? So how do any of us go from vulnerability meaning danger to vulnerability becoming our superpower? Like what makes the difference?
Yeah, it's a great question, Daniel. Thanks. I think what changed it. I can speak to I can speak to my experience,
Yeah.
and retrained as an emotional health coach. So I can sort of dip into the my clients and things like that. But ultimately, for me, it was once I'd had the breakdown, I had to find one person where I felt safe. And it starts with, I believe, with one person. If you can find one person that makes you feel safe, you ask a lot of people, is there anyone in your life you felt safe with? Many people will struggle to come up with even one. Some will come up with a well-meaning grandparent when they were young, or maybe a friend, that they could be themselves around, or something like that. But for me, that was a professional. So I found the right coach, a guy called Piers Cross, who's made an incredible film called Boarding on Insanity about the boarding school world. And uh, I found him in my darkest hour. I still don't know how. The universe sort of just led me via Google to him, because I hadn't been looking at any of this school stuff. I've been in talk therapy for decades, since 20 years old. And I'd been putting sticky plasters, band-aids on gunshot wounds for 20 years in therapy. Um, Being heavily strategic around my counselors and therapists to keep them away from the tough stuff, and use my articulate speech to tie them up in knots and keep them away from the good stuff. So when I showed up for the first time completely broken with my coach Piers, and I realized that it didn't matter what I could tell him, he was never shocked and he never pushed me away. And all of me was genuinely welcome. And the more I shared, the more connected I was in the therapeutic process. That for me was the first big moment, and the light bulb went on. And when I started talking, I couldn't shut up. So I had so much grief, so much, my healing work so far. I spent a year and a half. I didn't set out to do this. But we use the archetypal model of king, warrior, magician, lover. And yeah, I noticed you mentioned earlier something that reminded me of Robert Bly and some words you used around gold and things like that. So, um, with king, warrior, magician, lover, it's perfect framework, or queen, warrior, magician, lover, is you deal with fear, anger, grief, and joy, and you're working your way around those four all the time. So I spent a year and a half in fear. I had to deal with the fact I could barely leave the house because I've become so paranoid, so
Mm.
anxious. And then once the fear started to become a little bit more manageable, balanced, suddenly then I was just grieving. And I remember Piers saying to me, we've all got a lake, an ocean of tears to cry down, and what's at the bottom of that lake is the gold.
Mm.
So just keep crying, find stuff to cry about, and I had a lot. Stuff at school was difficult. The first 7 years before boarding school, mum was very emotionally, mentally unwell. She was an alcoholic. Um, Dad was at work a lot. Um, some difficult stuff. And then boarding school. And when I came home from boarding school, mum died at 13 of a brain tumor. And insert troubled teens after that, drink, drugs, self-destruction. And just when I thought I was getting my life back in my 20s and things, we had an amazing son called Ben who died when he was 4 years old. So I hadn't grieved for any of that. I was trained in a model of hardcore dissociative sort of keep calm and carry on, stiff upper lip stuff. So by the time I turn the floodgates on 5 years ago, I just cried and cried and cried. There was so much to grieve. Um, and then once grief had sort of started to move through, came the anger, and wow, that was pretty scary. That was dealing with a lot of anger, and now enjoy, thankfully, and always course correcting, always a work in progress until there are no more tomorrows. But yeah, your question around vulnerability was, for me, that it was that very first time where I showed up exactly as myself and I wasn't pushed away.
Mm.
And you know, 10,000 or more years ago, we had we had the tribal structures, and we had the communities where it just wouldn't have gone that far. It would have been dealt with in community, by the people around you in your group. But we've become very, very individualistic and very disconnected now. And so you've got to go pay someone to do it. And that's okay. That's the way it goes.
Mm.
Yeah, that first relationship, and from then men's work, men's groups, I had to learn to feel safe around men again. Men were dangerous. They were competitive, violent. That was my model of it, from the boarding school system. Or you had to be competitive with them and staggy and all the rest of the nonsense. So doing men's work and seeing other guys being vulnerable and opening up, whatever it is, whether it's a 12-step program or I went through the Mankind Project and other men's groups. So yeah, it just snowballs from there. But a wonderful question, because I think that first moment where you show up exactly as you are and you're not rejected is a turning point.
Mm. Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Two things come to mind as you share that. You made a reference to Robert Bly and Mankind Project, and that work has been important for me also. And of course, there's a metaphor that Bly brings forward, that at the bottom of this lake, and you kind of referred to it in a way, at the bottom of a lake, there is what we could call in normal language authenticity or realness or our intrinsic power or gold. In his lexicon, it's the wild man, right? But there's something beautiful down there that's covered over, and it never occurred to me this way before until you were speaking, that the grief, the tears, and you spoke about how much you had when you opened it up. I often think of grief and tears as adding water to something or liquid to something, But in a way, as you spoke of it, it occurred to me, it's, well, that's like taking the water out of that lake to reveal the gold and the authenticity. So thanks for that. I'd never thought of it that way. And one of the ways I think of vulnerability, I'm curious how this lands for you, is that when we have nothing nothing to hide or nothing to protect, then we don't actually have, that when we're open and transparent, we could call that vulnerability. But we only get to that in some way because we know that we can handle whatever comes to us or whatever comes out of us. And I think of many, many years ago, I was early in my spiritual wanderings, and I was doing this funny little gig where I was making a film, and I was working with some enlightened teachers. And one invited me to come film a group of his in the Czech Republic. And it was a group of his that met 3 times a year, and they were very deep, very intense, releasing a lot of their own trauma. And this was their second meeting. And I arrived there, and he announced to the group, 100 people, he said, "This is Daniel, and he's going to be filming the workshop this week." Pin drop, silence for a moment, and then hands, hands, hands. So many people got upset. Like, whoa, what do you mean filming? What for? And where's it going to be shown? And the guy who was leading the group, amazing. I was watching him, and I was thinking to myself, like, oh, they don't want me here. Let me get out of here. I'm sorry. And he let everybody speak. And then he said, when you can do whatever you do, say whatever you want to say, and then they show the film of it on the big screen at Times Square, then you know that you are free.
Mm.
And then there was the second pin drop quiet moment. And what occurred to me, and I don't know, but it's felt to me like everybody there realized, like, what they're there for is to get free. And if they can share, and I didn't use any of that film in any public way anyway, but if they could share with the possibility that somebody else would see it, then that was a whole different level of freedom. So I guess my question to you here is that idea of nothing to hide, right? Nothing that we need to protect as vulnerability being power. Does that make any sense from the way you work?
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. That's a beautiful story. Thank you so much for sharing that. It brought up stuff for me in that 18 months ago, for the making of that film, Boarding on Insanity, I mentioned, a retreat was filmed by a production crew in the UK for people doing emotional healing work from boarding school abuse and neglect. And yeah, that was a real process. The filming of it was difficult to completely unravel in front of someone with a camera. That's hard enough. But like most things, like listening to yourself on a voicemail, the hardest bit is when it comes to editing and looking at it and going, "Oh my god, I said what?" And I did what? And, so yeah, I can really connect with that process. It was difficult, and it pointed that I had a lot of work left to do. We all got a lot of work to do, but there was a lot of work in there in judgment and shame and things. But to your point about kind of the letting, I was having my weekly coaching, therapy stuff today, and I've been in a place for the last 6 months where I've called the Great Letting Go, and it's just one thing at a time that I'm working on letting go of. And as you say, as soon as you let go of either the connection, the connection to the outcome of everything, and you just show up in your fullness every day in integrity, and basically the rest is really up to you. Just get on, control the things you can control, and get on with it, and then enjoy it. But that is easier said than done. That's a bumper sticker thing, that to actually live that is really quite challenging. So yeah, I mean showing up in your fullness every day, that's a process. The vulnerability, letting go. For me, I remember a great story from my coach was he said the turning point for him at that point, he'd had a breakdown and was living in a Buddhist monastery. Um, he said he gave up of getting his own way. He realized he wasn't going to get his own way, and he wasn't going to get what he wanted, and he focused from that point onwards on only kind of what he needed and personal integrity. And I think that's really stayed with me. So at the moment, yeah, it's a great letting go of different things, the ego side of things, the stories we all tell ourselves about who we are and what we're capable of, even what the what's the nature of life, the construct of the universe, all the really deep spiritual stuff. Ultimately, it is a process of letting go of the sort of crap that has packed on top of you over the years. And you just, people say they see the mask cracking and lots of analogies, but it all just starts to drop away. And ultimately, we get back to what is a core self. Yeah, I don't know many people who've kind of got there, but that's not the point. The point is just to keep walking the path. So, I don't know if that answered your questions. I got a little bit lost there, but yeah, let me know if there's anything you'd like me to clarify there.
Well, that's great. I appreciate that, what you just shared. And I'm also aware that time is flying along here. So I pause for a moment. We could take a breath. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about so far that you would like to bring forward?
Hmm. Yeah, thank you. I mean, yeah, one of the things we touched on boarding in private schools, and see, speaking to someone who's spent a lot of their life in the, I know you're not there at the moment, but in the States and things. The Seen and Heard, which is the not-for-profit,
Hmm.
a group of us established a couple of years ago. Um, we support the well-being of past and present pupils of boarding and independent day schools and their families. It's the first time anyone's really done anything like that because it's a group that's perceived as privileged. So
Hmm.
why on earth
Hmm.
would they need support? Any sort of support services? Um, but we get a lot of people coming on to our free online sharing groups and connecting to us looking for specialist therapists or whatever from the US,
Hmm.
um, because the private school system is really well entrenched in America. Lots of boarding schools, there's the military schools, all sorts, and it's not a topic of conversation to talk about institutional abuse and neglect in those sort of so-called privileged educational environments. So that was a really interesting one for me to see so many Americans coming to our groups and saying, we are not talking about this here.
Hmm.
If I even mentioned to anyone that I didn't like school or something happened to me at school, they just go, oh, "Come on, you were lucky to go there, right? And you went to the best university and you got the best job and blah 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 blah." So it just diminishes their experience. But yeah, so I'm intrigued as to see how the conversation evolves in the States and what your thoughts are as well.
Yeah, well, the first thing that comes to me when you speak that is I remember when I first read a American fiction writer by the name of Pat Conroy, and he wrote some amazing novels that really came out of his experience of having attended, oh, I forget which one, but one of the elite U.S. military schools in the South. And he described fictional accounts of, but based in reality. He described some of the abuse that happened there, and holy moly, was he chastised for it, and chastised being a very gentle word. He got a lot of backlash for that. And so it takes a lot of courage to to bring the truth out, including, it makes sense to me from people who are saying like, well, you're privileged, what do you got to complain about? Come on, you got a good job, you're making a lot of money. Well, yes, and so yeah, I love that that y'all are bringing the focus that way, and so much to me, so much of emotional intelligence and the value and importance of it is just opening it up, right? Let's talk about this stuff. I grew up in a family where, something I heard from my mother often was, "We don't talk about that." Right? We don't talk about that. And I remember, the great film from your country, Secrets and Lies. When I saw that film so long ago, thinking like, "Oh, I get it. This is my childhood. No wonder we're so messed up." So yeah, I love that y'all are doing that and bringing it forward. And specifically, I don't have my own experience with boarding school, though I certainly have seen it in a lot of places with friends and some clients, and it's beautiful work. So thank you.
No, thank you for sharing that, Darren. Yeah, Daniel. Sorry. Um, yeah, the secrets and lies bit, and we don't do that around here that you just shared from your family. That is at the heart of an institutional upbringing. So whether you're in a boarding and private school, whether you're in a state care home, I think group home, foster homes, this sort of stuff, there's cultural ways of being, norms. And I had, there's a guy called Wyndham Wallace, who's a music writer, music critic, but he's really very good where he went to a boarding school. He was abused at his boarding school in the UK. He has a very good way of saying that they're like cults. These institutions, they have a language of their own. They have a culture of their own, and so when a child gets there, whatever age, could be, in the UK could be 4, 5, 6, 7, 13, whatever it is, they very quickly have to, it's adapt or die.
Mm,
Because that, when you're a young person, there's no real difference between kind of social death and real death. They're both, any lack of connection with caregivers or your environment equals death. So whatever happens, the child will adapt to try and survive and fit in. And the late Joy Chevron, who was a brilliant writer and professor over here, she sadly passed away this year, but she
mm,
talked about the ABCD of boarding school syndrome. But you can apply it to any real sort of battleground childhood. And the ABCD is: A is abandonment.
mm,
You're in a no leave situation. Bereavement. There is, boarding school, the parents leave, or in the state care facility, the parents are gone and they're not coming back, and the child has to deal with that. The C is captivity.
mm,
It's the moment it kicks in where you've got nowhere to go. There's nowhere safe because the dormitories aren't safe. In the schools, a lot of the boarding schools, it's different now, but they didn't have doors on the toilets. They did. You bathed in front of 20 other kids. There was nowhere to go. So the captivity, you couldn't leave. Sometimes some kids would see their parents maybe twice a year, maybe not at
mm,
all. That's the C, and then D finally, dissociation.
mm,
Ultimately, at that point, you have to check out because you're not going to survive otherwise. So, whatever that battleground childhood is, whether it's a so-called privileged one or one of deprivation, or one of a nice on the outside middle class family upbringing, but where there's no love connection, where there are things you can't talk about, there are things you can't be, all the duty and honor nonsense. Whatever it is, at some point you're going to go through that ABCD, and the dissociation bit. That's a hell of a thing to heal from.
mm,
Um, it is the curse of our age. Is dissociation and disconnection. Um, we live in a highly connected, technology world. Look at us talking all over the world, but our disconnection to our source of our power, the earth, our full selves, um, in shamanic terms, power loss, soul loss, whatever your sort of chosen way of describing it is. Um, our fall from that connection over the last 5,000-6,000 years has been dramatic and very disconnected. But I'm very hopeful that and believe that we are on an upswing now. Um, the world is changing. I can see it change. I can feel it changing for the better. And although we'd all love it to go faster, the reality is, I come with a very optimistic voice, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and that's a perfect segue as we are winding down connection. So, for people in our audience, live or by rebroadcast, who say, I want to connect with Chris, the work you're doing with CIC, with your coaching, with any of it, what's the best way for people to get in connection with you?
Oh, thank you. That's kind. So, Seen and Heard is seenheard.org.uk. Show notes or however you share these things, I'm sure. But that's the way to get in touch if you're looking to talk about the boarding and private school side of things. And that'll find its way through to me. My leadership program with Piers Cross is compassionateleadersglobal.com. You can get hold of me through either of those. But just love any sort of conversation that, whether we're talking about ways to heal in adulthood, or the other side of our work at Seen and Heard is to bring really proactive well-being and welfare programs into schools for young people. So my great passion, emotional freedom technique, EFT tapping, motion coaching, getting back to unstructured play, time in nature, getting rid of this ridiculously overheated kind of exam culture and testing culture. So whether it's for young people and parents, part of my work, the adult coaching, healing, leadership side of things, or the boarding school stuff, there's hopefully 3 places there for people to connect.
That's great. I love it. Thank you. Okay, well, I believe that brings us to the last question, the big question. This question is so big, it's impossible, which also means it's impossible to fail it. So, okay, if I ask you the big question?
Sure, yeah.
And I say it's big and impossible because, Chris, you've got a ton of experience. You've got a world of passion and care for the work you're doing. And what I'm asking you to do is distill that, to boil it down. So if you had one thing only to share with our audience that will help them to live their most vibrant, thriving life, what's that one thing?
For me, live in right relationship. So if you live in right relationship with yourself, you will live in right relationship with your world around you, your environment, your community, your planet, and ultimately, then as you move through your life, it's a hell of a lot easier and a lot more fun. So, yeah, for me, just live in right relationship and work out who you are, and the rest will just fall into place.
That's beautiful. I love it. Live in right relationship. In Hawaii, we've got the word pono and we've got the word kuleana, and both of those get to exactly what you're speaking about. And that's something that's accessible and available for all of us, right, in moment to moment. So wonderful. Chris, thank you so much for having this time with us, but also for this, what the courage you've had to face some of your own shadows, to do the work that you've done and the work that you're doing in the world. I really appreciate all of that. Thank you.
Well, bless you. Thank you very much, and thank you for your work, Daniel, for this show and the 30 years of your amazing spiritual journey, the books, etc. It's always lovely to connect with a like-minded soul on their journey. So yeah, bless you in your work, and thank you to anyone who's listening.
Yeah, well, exactly so. Y'all that are listening, watching, you are who I thank as well. You are the real heroes of the story. You're the reason that I am here. I love that you are more than interested in a vibrant, thriving life. You're doing something about it. You're here getting inspiration, entertainment, education, and again, I implore you, do something, right? Something sparked for you today. Some new idea, some insight came. Do something with that. Take a step, because that's where the rubber meets the road. Y'all, I love that you have been with us. Thank you so much. I'll be back with you again soon. I love you. Aloha. Mahalo for tuning in to the Art of Vibrant Living show, y'all. I'm Daniel Aaron, and may you live with great vibrancy